On Palm Sunday, I stated that the procession into Jerusalem by Jesus and his followers was a public display of resistance to the Roman way of dominance and directly leads to his crucifixion on a Roman cross. The next story of Matthew's Gospel takes issue with the way the great temple is being run against that backdrop of Roman occupation. Then Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, "It is written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer,' but you are making it a den of robbers." It's important for us to attempt to understand where Jesus' anger is coming from. And it's critical for us to realize that Jesus is not taking issue with the practice of animal sacrifice. Bird offerings of animal sacrifice was the normal practice of Judaism throughout Jesus' life and continued to be the practice until the great temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. There's nothing to suggest that Jesus found this practice distasteful. Now, it is possible that Jesus did not care for seeing the temple run as a business, with the marketplace inside the holy area, but Jesus would have understood the necessity here. People came from great distances to visit and give offerings at the temple. One could hardly expect someone to bring unblemished animals over a great distance. It was a practice that was to end at a time decreed by God. The book of Zechariah in the 14th chapter states that there shall no longer be traders in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day, meaning the day when the Lord comes to Jerusalem. So it's possible that Jesus may have understood that his role was to end this practice, but it's more likely that looking back on things, his disciples and those who wrote Gospels may have decided that Jesus as Lord would have been the one to end this practice. But regardless, it doesn't really explain Jesus' anger. He would have understood why the selling of animals was going on, even if he didn't care for it. So it has to be something else. And it seems logical to me that Jesus' anger really comes from the current administration's attempt to profit from the holy practice. Specifically, I think he's set off by blatant price gouging he finds at the temple. Hear me out on this, okay? You've probably been to Disney World or theme parks or maybe tried to get a meal at the airport. Do things cost what they do outside of those places? No, they always cost more, and sometimes a lot more. They know that you're stuck there. And, well, sometimes they profit off it. Roman coins or any other foreign currency were not to be used in the temple. So it was necessary to exchange the currencies for temple coinage. The presence of the money changers inside the temple suggests that the practice had become a money-making technique, where the average person lost out on the exchange. To further the gouging, everything does cost more in the temple. The animals themselves were marked up to an inflated price, a convenience fee, if you will. And of course, this was passed on to the pilgrim and pocketed by the temple leaders. Now, acceptable sacrifices included bulls, sheep, goats, and doves. And Matthew's gospel specifically mentions doves. And that makes a lot of sense to me because it represents the least expensive sacrifice, which would have been what the poor opted for. The poor who could least afford to be taken advantage of. And yet they too paid more than they should. Jesus was infuriated by the way those in power benefited from other people's faithfulness. Now, Jesus' action here was costly. You can get away with saying a lot of things and being verbally critical of power systems, but when you mess with the bottom line, when you mess with the money, you're messing with fire. And the Romans, who certainly profited from the money flow into the temple, would be far more willing to listen to charges about someone upsetting the finances of the system than about someone healing on the Sabbath. This action of Jesus in the temple likely factored into the Roman decision to execute him.